Hi, my name is Umaymah Rashid and this is LA Currents. Today we're here with Dr. Nadine Diaz and Dr. Giselle Petzinger from the USC Keck School of Medicine, Department of Neurology, and we're going to talk a little bit about memory and aging. We're going to start with Dr. Petzinger. Can you talk to us a little bit about memory and aging and the work you do?
Absolutely. So one thing that we're facing in our society right now is a challenge of a large number of people aging, and we call this reverse demographics. So our country and many countries around the world are facing a number of people growing in over 65, so more people over 65 than younger than 5. And the reason this matters is that one of the things that we know with aging is that we get changes in memory. Disorders of memory are common as we get older, and there are two in particular that are common, one of which is Alzheimer's disease, and the other is Parkinson's disease. They're both similar in that they both have thinking problems. What makes them distinct is that Parkinson's disease is typically known for a problem with movement, or that people move slow. What people don't realize is that very commonly it also has a thinking problem as well. So that's a challenge because thinking impairments can get very severe over time, and we don't really have treatments for it. So we have medications that offer some symptomatic relief, but they don't really change the course of disease. The other big distinction in the sorts of thinking problems you see between, for example, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's is that Alzheimer's tends to have more of what we'd call a memory-related problem. So these are sort of informational data bits where people will forget, for example, where they live. They may forget people in their home that they live with. In Parkinson's disease, the problem is more of a working memory problem. And what I mean by that, it's being able to problem solve and process information on a day-to-day basis. So there are memory impairments in one hand in Alzheimer's, and in Parkinson's disease, it's more of a processing or problem solving. Both of these, though, get worse over time. And so when it starts getting worse and creating functional impairment, where a person simply can't do things on their own, that's when we start using the term dementia. So you can imagine that someone may come down with what we'd call early features of memory problems that over time progress to dementia. So severity is part of what we define dementia. In terms of, as I said, in terms of treatment, one of the challenges is, as I mentioned, is we don't really have treatments for thinking problems. And people are obviously working. The research is ongoing to try to develop interventions and understand the mechanisms that may lead to new therapeutics. However, in the same time, what's been really exciting is the whole idea of what role lifestyle plays. And specifically, when I'm talking about lifestyle, I'm talking about exercise. Exercise and its importance in brain health, I would say, really came out of the aging field to start with, which was the idea that as I age and start having some changes with aging, that the way I practice lifestyle, i.e. how much I exercise, can make an impact on how well I do over time. And that's been shown behaviorally, meaning that people who practice exercise regularly, whether as an adult or or even many years before, 20, 30 years before, and then being examined as an adult, have better thinking capacity than a person who's just sedentary. That work has also led to some imaging data that seems to suggest that brains seem to be bigger, maybe bigger in size, for example. That's then led to studies to look at it specifically in people who have diseases now. So most of that work was done before disease has been present. So now, probably in the last, I would say, 15 years, a lot of interest to look at lifestyle, and again, specifically exercise, in people who've been diagnosed with Parkinson's and who've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, to begin to see how that may impact thinking. And the data in that is promising.
Okay, and so what is it showing? What is the relationship between exercise and the way the brain works as it relates to memory and aging?
Right, so great question. I think there's a couple things. I mean, I think first and foremost, the studies have begun to show that in general, you want to be regular about it. So some routine of exercise is important. I mean, you can take lapses, obviously, and not exercise for weeks at a time. But in general, you want to create a consistent pattern of what and how you're practicing exercise. So you want to be doing it on a regular basis. And generally speaking, we tend to think about exercise as being 3 times a week. That started off basically on cardiac health, so borrowing the data from cardiac studies and the benefits of exercise on heart health. We started looking at basically 3 times a week. Over time, people started asking questions, 2 types of questions. One question developed about the intensity of that practice. How hard should I be working? And the second question, there's many questions, but these are some basic questions that came about, was whether it mattered regarding the type of exercise that I'm doing. And I think probably what started off with was the idea that aerobic practice, meaning getting your heart rate up, probably started off with the best data. This again came from the aging field, where people began to look at aerobic practice, measuring how well you are aerobically fit through exercise, and that correlated with changes in memory, i.e. memory changes were less if you were aerobically practicing. And again, we're talking about studies that are conducting over at least a year, right, to be able to see these changes. In Parkinson's, though, I'd say it's been a little bit different, because we've been interested in the Parkinson's field and looking at a different type of exercise, and that would be what we'd call more skill-based. So skill-based practices are exercises, or any type of exercise where you're problem-solving, i.e. learning a new skill. So whether that be Tai Chi or yoga or boxing, I'm involving more processing or problem-solving. And the idea there is that it's a type of learning. So exercise, what's kind of cool about it is that it has all these different dimensions, you see. On one dimension, it is about aerobic. You can work hard enough and intense enough to get your heart rate up, right? But the other aspect of exercise, which is what makes it so unique, is it also has this other interesting part, which is about learning. And the reason we care about that is when you're learning, we know connections are made, for sure. So learning creates circuitry related to thinking, and in that context, maybe repairing areas of the brain affected by these disease states. And so these are the sort of studies that we're looking at right now, which is how and why, how are they different? Where are they tapping? What mechanisms are they tapping into that makes aerobic offer some unique benefits to the brain that may be a little different than when I'm problem solving and learning, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely makes sense. I feel like the research around all fields says that, you know, exercise and learning is beneficial for us all. And so Dr. Diaz, Dr. Petzinger talked a lot about research, and you work with the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. So can you talk a little bit about more of the research you're doing and why that's important?
Sure, most definitely. I've actually been in medical research since '95 at USC, beginning with breast cancer among African American women and Latinas. That transitioned into to children's asthma, then to diabetes, and I started with the ADRC in 2007. So I'm the main chief recruiter for all the participants who meet criteria for either observational studies, intervention studies, or clinical trials. When I started in 2007, the age criteria then was about 65 on up. Now it's 18 on up. And as Dr. Petzinger mentioned, the aging population is growing in numbers. So in America, each day 10,000 people turn 65. And we are booming. We are living longer and working longer, and we definitely have to prepare for the future, not just with health and aging, but policy and legislation. So back to research. What we provide at the ADRC, which is federally funded, are research opportunities to participate in clinical trials, observational research, or intervention studies. So at the federal level, there are approximately 36 universities under the ADRC umbrella, Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and we're all working diligently to find a cure. At the state level, we have the California Alzheimer's Disease Centers, and there are approximately 10 in California, and those centers are used for educational purposes, training, physicians, geriatric care, etc. So right now in America, 5.8 million Americans have Alzheimer's disease. 3.2 million are women. And usually the women become the caregivers for their loved ones or family members. Every 65 seconds, someone is developing Alzheimer's disease. In California, it's impacting people of color. So African Americans are 3 times likely to get Alzheimer's disease or develop it. And then Latinos are approximately 1.5 times as likely to get it. It's estimated by 2060, 832% of, it's projected, 832% of Latinos will develop it. So we are really, we really have to work harder, smarter, and in finding a cure, but more so is actually how are we going to take care of those that are developing the disease. So what we offer at ADRC are observational studies that pertain to exercise for those who are sedentary. We are really diligently recruiting for those that have a family history. So I'm out in the community looking for those people who may have a mother or father who is diagnosed or deceased from the disease. And
okay, and so you mentioned something really important, I think. You talked about the caregiving aspect of it. And I know that in memory and aging, in caregiving, there is a large segment of the unpaid caregiving that goes on that we don't talk a lot about, and that it seems we may not be preparing for with this increase in diagnoses, predicted for the future. So can you speak a little bit about your moving to a care now, cure later mode of thinking?
Right. Care now, cure later actually came from the Lancet Commission that was in London 2017, May of 2017. And it's where a group of experts gathered together from all over the world to talk about AD. And again, because the disease is impacting people nationally and globally, we have to change our direction a little bit and talk about caregiving. As a geriatric social worker, I am on the phone every day or interfacing with people who are challenged with finding help to help take care of their loved one. One of the major challenges is that, say for a baby boomer, for example, mom has Alzheimer's disease and the daughter has to work full time. Oftentimes they have to stop working or they have to augment their schedule, which means that affects their retirement package and everything else that comes with it. So 16 million people right now are actually taking care of their loved ones without pay. And that is equivalent to 18.5 billion hours of service, unpaid, which equals $234 billion. This is just this year. So by 2050, it'll be $1.1 trillion just for caregiving. So we have to work in research, in medicine, and also in legislation and policy.
Definitely, definitely. And so Dr. Petzinger, we talked a little bit about, Dr. Diaz mentioned a little bit about the expected diagnosis around the African American population, Latino population, and women. Do we know why there are more diagnoses in those segments of the population?
I think those are great questions. I think that's people are trying to understand that, but some of it could be related to other comorbidities, as an example. So the idea that there are certain comorbidities that are putting you at risk, particularly for Alzheimer's, not so much for Parkinson's, but for Alzheimer's, such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, which are going to be a little bit more common in these populations for various reasons. That is an example of what might put these populations at slightly higher risk for Alzheimer's.
And when you talked about men being at a slightly higher risk for Parkinson's, do we
Right.
understand anything about that?
We don't actually, yeah. So again, great questions. We don't actually know sometimes why certain genders are more susceptible. In Alzheimer's, I know there's a lot of interest in understanding the role of estrogen and what role estrogen plays as a risk factor for developing Alzheimer's. But in Parkinson's disease, not completely clear why men are a little bit higher risk than women. So it's an important question that we don't yet know. Correct.
Okay. And Dr. Diaz mentioned that research used to start at a later age, and now it's opened up to the younger population. Can you talk a little bit about why we want to learn more about young people's brains?
Yeah, absolutely. I think partly because there is this idea that some of these disorders may start much younger, right? And certainly even in Parkinson's disease, we don't actually know when these disorders start. And also the idea that the benefits, for example, of lifestyle is really lifelong. It's not like you don't get benefits if you start as an adult, but the idea that you're beginning to get these habits going quite young is going to have a longer lasting impact on how you're going to perform later in life, right? If you've already incorporated these quite young. So, and I think also, so there's the lifestyle question. There's also trying to understand the disorder. How early do these disorders start? Can we predict something about who will get them? Yeah. Again, looking at all these different factors and recognizing that these are things that already start making a difference at a young age. So these are why these questions are so important. Yeah.
Okay, and can you speak a little bit about, I read about the characteristics of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and it seems that some of these characteristics or symptoms can kind of be mistaken for just the normal aging process. Right. So can you talk about how you are able to diagnose and make that distinction between normal aging and the diagnosis?
Right, yeah, so that's a good point. I mean, so there is anticipated changes as we get older, obviously. So when we're looking at things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, we're looking for thinking changes that are over and above aging, and we can assess that in various ways, but one of the ways is through standard what we call neuropsychological metrics. So these are scales that we can administer to people that will look at different aspects of thinking. There are actually 5 domains of thinking. We talked about at least 2 of those, what we call the executive or the working memory, and then the more longer lasting, what we call learning and recall related memory aspects. So think about it as memory and working memory. So we have tests that we can administer that will let us assess where you're at compared to your age matched individuals. So when we're talking about, again, something like dementia, we can start even a little earlier assessing changes with what we call mild cognitive impairment. So these are really early features that we believe we can pick up with a neuropsych testing, and we can predict will probably lead to dementia. So we start with something called mild cognitive impairment. So what is mild cognitive impairment? Again, it's going back to those neuropsychological metrics and basically assessing a person on these different domains, comparing you to age match, and noting that you are about 1.5 to 2 standard deviations away from what we expect with aging. Correct. So we need to see a couple of those domains affected on these tests to call that mild cognitive impairment. Now, mild cognitive impairment, these are changes that we're seeing, and yet there's people who are still functioning okay. So they may even still be working. But the reason we want to pick them up early is because that MCI, mild cognitive impairment, often does progress to dementia. So that would be the time that you really want to be aggressive with interventions earlier than dementia, which is now functional impairment. So that's what it leads to. And again, the whole idea that obviously medications could play a very important role there, but also again the importance of something like lifestyle. And again, I can't emphasize that enough, because I think that the cool thing about lifestyle is that it's free, number one. Number two, what we're also learning about lifestyle, and again, I can use exercise as a perfect example, is we're also recognizing that, in general, there's these general concepts of what exercise is. It's not any specific exercise. It's keeping the general idea of, okay, if I do some aspect of aerobic training, for example, maybe if I'm doing an hour 3 times a week, make 15 minutes of that a hard workout. And you can do that in any way you want, whether that's climbing a hill, whether that's climbing stairs, whether that's biking. It really doesn't matter as long as you're getting your heart rate up. And then 45 minutes of which I'm doing something skillful. I'm learning tennis, tai chi, yoga, anything that's tapping into something where I'm learning to do something better is what I would consider a skill. Again, so the nice part about that is that I don't have to sign up for a 24-hour fitness to do that. So we're not talking about creating 24-hour fitnesses everywhere. What we're talking about is thinking about these concepts and leveraging what's in communities. So the idea that wellness lifestyle is something that's happening at a community level. So it takes health, the whole idea of cognitive health and well-being and lifestyle is owned by people, and it's owned by communities. It's not owned by an institution. It's not owned by an insurance company. It's not owned by a database. It's owned by individuals living in a community, what we call real-world practices. And so, again, lifestyle in communities, real-world practice, allowing people to become empowered in what matters and what is meaningful, is also keeping them healthy, which is awesome.
Yeah, and a lot of the things you're talking about seem really simple, and I think it's a matter of just educating people around these ideas and these concepts. So, Dr. Diaz, I know when we're talking about research in any industry, we're really cure focused, and I know that there is no cure, for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's right now. So if we're not cure focused, why is the research so important?
Well, the research is important because it will help us to find new medications or new treatments to help those who are suffering with the disease or are prone to get it. Research is ongoing, and if we don't have any research, we won't have any new inventions or treatments that may provide a cure.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned before, I've been in research for so long, and for many years, since 1995, and I can tell you this disease is the most heart-wrenching. It's the bad news disease because there's no cure. Dr. Petzinger mentioned about metabolic conditions, hypertension, diabetes, and high cholesterol. And I want to piggyback on what you said, because those metabolic conditions definitely impact people of color across the country and here in LA. There's a vascular cohort study, and we are looking for people who have these metabolic conditions because we think that possibly these metabolic conditions affect our brain and obviously affect our heart. Also, medication. I mean, a lot of the people who are taking these metabolic medications are minorities. Am I wrong or right?
Yeah, I mean, diabetes is more prevalent.
More prevalent. So definitely. When I started at the ADRC, diabetes was brushed on, but now it's really...
Right, so you're talking about, again, these are risk factors, right? So, you know, one is addressing specific risk factors and then at the same time being proactive about lifestyle. And they're not, so one is not exclusive to the other, right? And I think going back to your point about cure, so I would say what we would probably say about cure is this. Number one, there probably isn't one single cure anyway, right? So I think what we're recognizing with many of these diseases is that they're hard, they're complex, there's a lot of different mechanisms, and more importantly, certainly for example for Parkinson's, there's probably more than one way to get it. So there probably is going to be, whatever that cure is really going to have probably multiple different aspects to it. Certainly lifestyle will be one component. We know that, you know, with everything we're seeing with lifestyle. Now that would be, so lifestyle with maybe some drug that would help modulate that. And the term I would probably say that we think about in general is what we call resilience, right? So the idea is that, you know, as we get older, everyone's going to come down with something, right? If it's not one thing, it's the other. So we don't live in bubbles. It's impossible not to come down with something. But what we can do, and giving a lifestyle as an example, is we can create the best version of ourselves, right? So the idea that if we maintain this sort of practice of lifestyle, we can maybe not necessarily stop everything, but if we have it, we are able to endure it better, we are able to handle it better, and we're the better version of ourselves, if that makes sense. Okay. So I think the term of, I like the idea of something like resilience, and the reason I like that is because that exists now. You know, so we're moving towards becoming more resilient, of course. We're moving towards a type of cure that's going to have multiple, perhaps, interventions. But at the same time, we're still doing things that make ourselves resilient. And that's an ongoing process, right? That's always relevant. And so I think, again, I like that idea because, again, that's something that we can do for ourselves as we're waiting for treatments that are going to make this even better yet. So think about it as, look, lifestyle creates resilience. Anything we're learning is just going to add more to that resilience, to keep us as healthy as possible, to live as long as we can, as healthy as we can. And I think that's a very good conceptual model to how to think about, as she said, dementia and how hard that is to manage when you come down with that. And even hard for your family, incredibly hard for your family.
Absolutely. And so, Dr. Diaz, I know we talked a little bit about some of the promising kind of interventions that you've seen, not just with your research center, but kind of globally. Can you speak a little bit to the kind of promising things you're seeing around Alzheimer research and the way we're engaging people with Alzheimer's?
Well, I think still we have a lot of work to do. Compared to the Netherlands, I mean, they really plan for the future for their aging population.
Can you talk a little bit about what they're doing?
Well, there's a place called Dementia Village, and if you YouTube Dementia Village, it is 15 acres, and it was actually built for those that are suffering with dementia, late stage. So this is where people go when they are getting closer to hospice, so to speak. But it's a place where they can still feel like they are a part of a community. meaning that they have a theater, they have a store, they have a library, they have places for engagement, for exercise. They want to provide an environment where they feel normal, even though they are declining. And so we don't have anything like that here in America or in Los Angeles, so that's something we need to work on.
Right.
Definitely.
So given what we're facing, you know, as a country, nationally, in our city, in a perfect world, how would you see it set up? How would you see us planning for our aging population in these diagnoses and research? What would you think?
Well, I think advocacy and policy and legislation are key factors, and we can start here at the local level. Start with Mayor Eric Garcetti and all of our 15 council persons and representatives, as well as the LA County Board of Supervisors. We have to start at home and state and federal. Some of our biggest advocates at the federal level are Congresswoman Linda Sanchez and Congresswoman Maxine Waters and Lucio Roybal Allard. They are the women at the forefront in California that are really advocating for more research, but also for lifestyle changes, as Dr. Petzinger mentions. In our underserved communities, unfortunately, we don't have the same amenities, such as quality food stores. We have a lot of food deserts that we need to also rethink on how we're planning our communities. Fast food is not a healthy thing, and Americans are sometimes addicted to fast food because it's easy, it's accessible, and that needs to change. So,
I think the other big thing is, you know, thinking about programs at the community level, right? And I think, again, as I said, it's about trying to see if we can leverage resources within the community. That's important because I feel to get community engagement, obviously there's a literacy piece that is teaching people about what to expect with aging and what to expect with these disorders and how they're different, but also developing programs out in the community and embed them in wellness centers that exist. They could be even high schools that are opened after hours for adults and seniors that can get involved in programs. And I don't think they don't have to be expensive. They can be programs that are already running maybe and maybe adapted for older individuals. And the fact is, the older individuals, they love it. You know, it provides a social context. It again gets them active. Again, in the lifestyle field, it's like, it's not about being easy. Nothing is supposed to be easy. You're supposed to be working your butt off because that's what the data says. And they love it. You know, so it's not about chair exercises, it's about getting them up and moving. But that movement could be anything from dance, it could be to theater. So in the Spanish community, in the Mexican American community, where theater is kind of a natural aspect of the culture, that's a great example of how we could develop, for example, theater programs for the older individuals to participate in, which they love to do. It offers narrative, and we begin to start showing how they can be validated. These programs are validated as effective in helping with cognition and then disseminated into the community. Lifestyle is a good place to start because the data is so strong now. And I think working with community leaders, that's definitely a possible implementation.
Thank you. And so if people want more information, Dr. Diaz, about research and getting involved or getting their family connected with resources, where's a good place for them to go?
They can call me at 323-442-7600 and ask for Dr. Diaz. For those who do have a family member with a diagnosis of, say, early stage dementia or AD, one of the criteria is to have a study partner. And that study partner is someone, such as a spouse, someone that the participant trusts and engages with on a daily basis and can provide information about the person's memory or their daily activities. And then for those that are overall healthy and may have a family history, they may not need a study partner because they're still functioning and they're healthy, and they're more than welcome to also call us as well.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Petzinger?
So I can be reached, for Parkinson's disease, it's the USC Department of Neurology that they can call, the 323-442-5710 for neurology, for Parkinson's, and also for Alzheimer's as well. So yes, that would be the best way.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Diaz, Dr. Petzinger. That's it for us here at LA Currents. I'm Umaymah Rashid. Thank you for joining us.